The Echoes of Trinity, a secret history of the bomb's hidden hands. The world remembers the flash, the mushroom cloud, the dawn of the atomic age forged in the barren deserts of New Mexico. Everyone knows the names: Oppenheimer, Einstein, Roosevelt, Truman. But what if the greatest scientific undertaking in human history, the one that ended a world war and permanently warped global politics, was not solely the work of privileged white men in suits? What if the very fabric of the Manhattan Project, a $2 billion enterprise shrouded in unparalleled secrecy, was stitched together by the unheralded hands of women, black workers, Native Americans, and immigrant spies, all laboring in the shadows, their contributions deliberately erased from the official history books? This is the story of the unseen architects, the brilliant, segregated minds who navigated labyrinthine security, faced relentless prejudice, and performed feats of engineering and calculation under the most crushing pressure imaginable. Their tale is one of national survival, groundbreaking science, and a profound, agonizing irony. The most liberal scientific endeavor of its day was simultaneously one of the most racially segregated worksites in America. This is the true, astonishing, and fact-laden saga of the hidden heroes who built the bomb that changed the world. Part 1. The Unlikely Crucible, 1941 to 1943. Chapter 1. A Whisper in the White House. The year is 1941. America is teetering on the edge of global war, but a far more sinister threat looms: the specter of a Nazi atomic bomb. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, already battling a nation skeptical of intervention, held a piece of paper that could change the war's trajectory. It was a letter, penned in elegant German script and signed by Albert Einstein, warning that uranium could be turned into a weapon of unimaginable power. The initial American response was slow, almost comically small. A few $1 million, a handful of university labs. But by the time Pearl Harbor was struck in December 1941, the gears of the behemoth had begun to turn. The project's first major pivot came in late 1942 when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers took control, assigning the effort to Brigadier General Leslie Groves, a logistical bulldog fresh off overseeing the construction of the Pentagon. Groves gave the project its innocuous code name, a simple reference to its initial scope: the Manhattan Engineer District. The die was cast. The scale was set to be continental. Chapter 2. The Geography of Secrecy. Groves's first and most crucial task was finding places, vast, remote, and utterly secret, where the complex, dangerous work of fission could be done. He needed sites far from prying eyes, capable of hosting tens of thousands of workers, yet with immense access to power and water. The choices were audacious. Site X in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a massive, sprawling complex carved out of rural farmland in the segregated South. Its purpose? Separating the rare, bomb-ready U-235 from its far more common sibling U-238. This required building 3 distinct, unprecedented plants, Y-12, K-25, and S-50, using 3 entirely different, unproven technologies. It would become a city overnight, housing 75,000 people. Site W in Hanford, Washington, a desolate tract of sagebrush and desert along the Columbia River. Its mission? Breeding the new element, plutonium, in gigantic nuclear reactors and chemically separating it, a process so lethal it had never been attempted on industrial scale. Site Y in Los Alamos, New Mexico, the intellectual heart, a secluded mesa high in the Jemez Mountains. This was J.R. Robert Oppenheimer's domain, where the physicists would design and assemble the actual weapons. Each site was a microcosm of 1940s America, included with its deep, endemic flaws, all magnified by the exigencies of war. The Echoes of Trinity, a secret history of the bomb's hidden hands. The world remembers the flash, the mushroom cloud, the dawn of the atomic age, forged in the barren deserts of New Mexico. Everyone knows the names: Oppenheimer, Einstein, Roosevelt, Truman. But what if the greatest scientific undertaking in human history, the one that ended a world war and permanently warped global politics, was not solely the work of privileged white men in suits? What if the very fabric of the Manhattan Project, a $2 billion enterprise shrouded in unparalleled secrecy, was stitched together by the unheralded hands of women, black workers, Native Americans, and immigrant spies, all laboring in the shadows, their contributions deliberately erased from the official history books? This is the story of the unseen architects, the brilliant, segregated minds who navigated labyrinthine security, faced relentless prejudice, and performed feats of engineering and calculation under the most crushing pressure imaginable. Their tale is one of national survival, groundbreaking science, and a profound, agonizing irony. The most liberal scientific endeavor of its day was simultaneously one of the most racially segregated worksites in America. This is the true, astonishing, and fact-laden saga of the hidden heroes who built the bomb that changed the world. Part 1. The Unlikely Crucible, 1941 to 1943. Chapter 1. A Whisper in the White House. The year is 1941. America is teetering on the edge of global war, but a far more sinister threat looms: the specter of a Nazi atomic bomb. President Franklin Roosevelt, already battling a nation skeptical of intervention, held a piece of paper that could change the war's trajectory. It was a letter, penned in elegant German script and signed by Albert Einstein, warning that uranium could be turned into a weapon of unimaginable power. The initial American response was slow, almost comically small. A few $1 million, a handful of university labs. But by the time Pearl Harbor was struck in December 1941, the gears of the behemoth had begun to turn. The project's first major pivot came in late 1942, when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers took control, assigning the effort to Brigadier General Leslie Groves, a logistical bulldog fresh off overseeing the construction of the Pentagon. Groves gave the project its innocuous code name, a simple reference to its initial scope: the Manhattan Engineer District. The die was cast, the scale was set to be continental. Chapter 2. The Geography of Secrecy. Groves's first and most crucial task was finding places, vast, remote, and utterly secret, where the complex, dangerous work of fission could be done. He needed sites far from prying eyes, capable of hosting tens of thousands of workers, yet with access to immense amounts of power and water. The choices were audacious. Site X, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. A massive, sprawling complex carved out of rural farmland in the segregated South. Its purpose? Separating the rare, bomb-ready uranium-235 from its far more common sibling, U-238. This required building 3 distinct, unproven plants, Y-12, K-25, and S-50, using 3 entirely different, unproven technologies. It would become a city overnight, housing 75,000 people. Site W, Hanford, Washington. A desolate tract of sagebrush and desert along the Columbia River. Its mission? Breeding the new element, plutonium, in gigantic nuclear reactors and chemically separating it, a process so lethal it had never been attempted on industrial scale. Site Y, Los Alamos, New Mexico. The intellectual heart. A secluded mesa high in the Jemez Mountains. This was J. Robert Oppenheimer's domain, where the physicists would design and assemble the actual weapons. Each site was a microcosm of 1940s America, with its deep, endemic flaws all magnified by the exigencies of war. Chapter 3. The Women Calculators of Los Alamos. At the very top, in the rarefied atmosphere of Site Y, a glaring, immediate problem arose. The physicists were brilliant, but their theoretical equations needed to be translated into practical, calculable numbers, literally predicting the physics of an explosion. These calculations were too complex for the early mechanical calculators, requiring days or even weeks of manual work by human computers. Enter the Caltech group, a small band of women, primarily wives and college graduates who had followed their scientist husbands to the secluded mesa. They were not hired as scientists, but as sub-professional help. Elizabeth, Lizzie Graves, one of the lead women. She and her team worked in a locked room, performing calculations for the implosion lens, the complex arrangement of high explosives needed to symmetrically squeeze a subcritical mass of plutonium. Their work, using Marchant and Monroe calculating machines, was absolutely essential. A single misplaced decimal could result in a fizzle instead of a nuclear detonation. The irony of security. The women often performed the most sensitive calculations, yet were not privy to the need to know that their husbands enjoyed. They knew they were working with massive explosive forces, but the true purpose, the atomic bomb, was kept from them. Their daily reality was a constant, mind-numbing repetition of differential equations, their only reward the knowledge that their numbers were perfect. They were the engine of the physics division, yet their names were absent from initial project histories. Chapter 4. The Segregation and the South's Sacrifice. Oak Ridge. The vast scale of Oak Ridge, built in Tennessee, presented General Groves with a political as well as a logistical nightmare: how to build the most advanced technological complex on Earth while adhering to the rigid Jim Crow laws of the American South. The solution was horrific in its efficiency: total segregation. The black labor force. Over 10,000 African-American laborers and technicians poured into Oak Ridge, many migrating from the Deep South seeking wartime work. They were assigned the heaviest, dirtiest, and often most dangerous construction and maintenance jobs. The unseen city. While white workers and scientists lived in modern, well-equipped neighborhoods like Townsite, black workers were confined to Happy Valley and Giffen Memorial Village, isolated dormitories and prefabricated homes that lacked paved roads, proper sewage, and even basic recreational facilities. A separate and unequal war effort. They were barred from using the same buses, cafeterias, and bathrooms as white employees. Black guards stood duty outside segregated sections of the plant, protecting white secrets. Even though they held vital roles, they were paid less and offered fewer opportunities for promotion than their white counterparts. The Calyutron Girls. Inside the massive Y-12 plant, which used magnetic separators or calutrons to enrich uranium, thousands of young women were hired as operators. They sat in rows of machines, watching meters, adjusting dials, and essentially babysitting the process. Most were high school graduates with no scientific training. They were told the machines were separating heavy oil. The truth was, they were manually controlling the world's first ever large-scale uranium enrichment operation, and they did it with incredible accuracy. Their collective nickname? The Queen Bees. Part 2. The Global Web of Secrecy and Espionage, 1943 to 1945. Chapter 5. The Native Land and the Plutonium Desert. The chosen site for plutonium production, Hanford in Washington, was not uninhabited. It was the ancestral land of the Wanapam, Yakima, and Nez Perce tribes who had lived along the Columbia River for millennia. Eminent domain and expulsion. The U.S. government, citing wartime necessity, forcibly evicted hundreds of families, offering minimal compensation. Their ancient fishing sites, their burial grounds, and their traditional land were swallowed up by the massive project. The irony of sacrifice. Many Native American men subsequently joined the segregated construction crews, building the very reactors that were polluting their traditional lands, unaware of the lethal product they were helping to create. The vast empty landscape that Groves sought was an empty only to the white settlers' view.
Chapter 6. Groves' Shadow War, the Alamos Mission. General Groves's paranoia was well-founded. The Nazis were racing toward the bomb. To combat this, he created a top-secret intelligence unit known as the Alamos Mission. Its purpose was to follow Allied troops into Europe, seize German nuclear materials, capture their scientists, and verify the status of the Nazi bomb project. The scientific spy, the mission was led by physicist Colonel Boris Pash, a volatile but brilliant military man. They often operated behind front lines, racing against time, and even against the Soviets, to secure targets. Operation Epsilon. The mission culminated in the capture of Germany's top 10 physicists, including Werner Heisenberg and Otto Hahn. They were interned at Farm Hall, a bugged estate in England, where the Americans secretly listened to their conversations. The shocking truth revealed in the transcripts that the Germans had not come close to weaponizing their research was one of the biggest secrets of the project, a fact that fundamentally altered the debate about using the bomb. Chapter 7. The Foreign Agents and the Unintended Spies. The project was not just an American effort, it was a multinational one, bringing together scientists fleeing fascism. The British contribution. The British Tube Alloys program was merged into the Manhattan Project, sending crucial scientists and engineers who played pivotal roles in all three sites. Klaus, Fuchs, and the atomic espionage. The project's secrecy was compromised from within. Klaus Fuchs, a German-born communist physicist working at Los Alamos, passed detailed classified information on the bomb design to the Soviet Union. His betrayal, only revealed years later, jump-started the Soviet nuclear program by years, directly setting the stage for the Cold War. Part 3. From Calculation to Conflagration, 1945. Chapter 8. The Birth of the Demon Core. The final months of the project were dominated by the challenge of the plutonium implosion device. The team faced a crisis. The plutonium bred at Hanford was dirtier than expected, forcing a complete overhaul of the gun-type design. The pit and the periphery. The core of the bomb, the demon core, was a subcritical sphere of plutonium. The handling and machining of this core was dangerous in the extreme, leading to fatal accidents that were classified until decades later. The unpaid debt, the human cost of secrecy. The immense industrial scale of the project meant a devastating number of workplace accidents. At Hanford, in the plutonium separation plant, workers, many of them minority laborers, were exposed to radiation and highly toxic chemicals with minimal warning or protection, the long-term health effects of which were ignored by the project's administration. Chapter 9. Trinity, the Moment of Truth. On July 16, 1945, in the Jornada de la Muerte desert, the world's first atomic bomb, the Gadget, was placed atop a 100-foot steel tower. The scientific spectacle, all the years of work, the miles of pipeline at K-25, the reactors at Hanford, the calculations of the Caltech women, came down to this one final test. The final irony: just weeks earlier, at the Potsdam Conference, President Truman was informed the test was successful. He had a weapon that could end the war. Yet the question of whether it should be used, a question debated fiercely by some scientists on the project, like Leo Szilard, was largely sidelined by the machinery of war and the immense investment of the American government. Chapter 10. The Legacy of the Hidden Hands. The bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. World War II ended abruptly. the Manhattan Project's mission was complete, and its official history began to be written, a history that centered the famous scientists and military leaders. The erased records, the stories of the black workers segregated in Happy Valley, the Calutron girls who unknowingly enriched the uranium, the Native Americans expelled from their land, and the hundreds of blue-collar workers exposed to toxic materials were systematically minimized or excluded from the public narrative. A slow emergence. Decades later, with the declassification of documents and the oral histories of survivors, the full, complex, and deeply ironic story of the Manhattan Project began to emerge. A project that was a model of scientific cooperation, but a bastion of racial and gender discrimination. Part 4. The Machines of War. Deep Technical Dive. Chapter 11. The Labyrinth of K-25. The core mandate of the Manhattan Project was to secure enough uranium-235, the rare isotope that could sustain a chain reaction. Natural uranium ore contains less than 1% U-235. The rest is U-238, which is useless for the bomb. Separating these isotopes is brutally difficult because they are chemically identical and differ in mass by only 0.9%. The difference is literally negligible in human terms, but critical in nuclear physics. General Groves initially pursued 4 different separation methods, a testament to the project's high-stakes, bet-on-everything philosophy. One of the most promising, and arguably the most ambitious construction project of the war, was gaseous diffusion, housed at K-25 in Oak Ridge. The principle of diffusion. The gaseous diffusion process relies on Graham's law, which states that lighter gas molecules travel slightly faster than heavier ones. The gas, uranium metal, was converted into uranium hexafluoride, the only uranium compound that is a gas at manageable temperatures. This gas is highly corrosive and deadly. The process. The UF6 gas was pumped through thousands of specialized porous barriers separating membranes. The lighter UF6 molecules would pass through the barriers fractionally faster than the heavier U-238F6 molecules. The cascade. A single barrier provides almost no enrichment. To achieve the required 80% enrichment, the process had to be repeated thousands of times in a continuous escalating series known as a cascade. The gas enriched slightly at one stage was piped to the next. The slightly depleted gas was sent back for reprocessing. This required a building of staggering scale. Building the world's largest factory. K-25 was constructed on a 6,000-acre site. The main plant was a U-shaped structure, over half a mile on each side, enclosing 48 acres under its roof. It was, by floor area, the largest building in the world at the time. Engineering marvels. The construction required 16,000 workers alone. Engineers had to solve unprecedented problems. Pumps and seals. They needed thousands of high-speed pumps capable of handling the highly corrosive UF6 without leaking, which would be disastrous. Internal parts had to be flawless and entirely oil-free. The barrier material. This was the project's single greatest technical hurdle. The barrier material had to have billions of microscopic pores, 10 to the minus 6 inches in diameter, that would not clog, degrade, or react with the UF6. The problem was largely solved by Dr. Clarence A. Johnson, who devised an electroplated nickel barrier. A power-hungry behemoth. The cascade was fueled by electricity, requiring a continuous flow equivalent to the entire power output of a state like Tennessee. It required its own immense power station to run the thousands of pumps necessary to keep the process moving. K-25 workers, many of them segregated laborers, worked around the clock in a dizzying environment maintaining pipes and valves that carried the invisible toxic gas that was making the bomb possible. The sheer scale of K-25 was a testament to American industrial might and the desperation of the war effort. The principle of magnetic separation. The process was based on the work of Nobel laureate Ernest A. Lawrence at Berkeley,
who adapted his cyclotron, a particle accelerator, into a production machine called a calutron. Ionization. Uranium was vaporized and electrically charged, ionized. Deflection. These uranium ions were fired into a huge vacuum tank placed between the poles of a colossal magnet. Separation. Since the lighter U-235+ ion is accelerated slightly faster than the heavier U-235+ ion, the magnetic field deflected the lighter ion into a tighter arc, allowing it to be collected in a separate pocket or receiver. The massive magnet and the queen bees. The calutrons required the most powerful magnets ever built. To save time and materials, Groves borrowed 15,000 tons of silver from the U.S. Treasury to wind the magnet coils, as copper was severely rationed for wartime use. This was the largest single requisition of silver in world history. The greatest surprise was in the operation of the machines. The physicists had designed the calutrons to be controlled by automated systems, but they quickly realized the machines were temperamental and sensitive to the slightest fluctuations. They required constant manual tuning. This is where the queen bees, thousands of young women, mostly recent high school graduates from the Appalachian region, stepped in. Unknowing experts. Hired at a respectable wartime wage, these women were trained to watch a bank of meters and manipulate dozens of dials and adjustment knobs to keep the ion beam aligned and maximize the yield of separated uranium.
They had no idea they were separating nuclear isotopes. They were simply told they were watching for variations in the heavy oil or process material. The physicists' revelation. The scientists were stunned. They initially believed highly trained engineers would be needed. Instead, the queen bees, using intuitive judgment and a skill the scientists couldn't quantify, often outperformed the PhDs in keeping the calutrons running efficiently. The cost of secrecy. The women were literally the hands enriching the bomb material, yet they were treated as interchangeable labor, kept in profound ignorance of the historic work they were doing. Their focus and dexterity were crucial for delivering the U-235 that would eventually arm the Little Boy bomb. Chapter 13. The Reactor's Heart and Plutonium Desert. The third major component of the project was the creation of plutonium, a man-made element produced by bombarding U-238 with neutrons in a nuclear reactor. This work was done at Site W, Hanford, Washington. Breeding the plutonium. The process was elegant in its physics, but terrifying in its engineering. The reactors Hanford required the construction of 3 massive water-cooled graphite-moderated reactors, B, D, and F. Uranium fuel slugs were loaded into channels in a gigantic graphite block. The chain reaction. The graphite slowed down the neutrons released from the fissioning uranium, allowing them to be absorbed by the much more abundant U-238. Transmutation. This absorption turned U-238 into U-239, which rapidly decayed into plutonium-239, the fissile material needed for the implosion bomb. The xenon poisoning crisis. The biggest threat to the operation nearly crippled the project in late 1944. During the initial tests of the B reactor, the world's first industrial-scale nuclear reactor, the chain reaction mysteriously stalled after a short run. The culprit, physicist John Wheeler, quickly calculated the cause: a massive buildup of a new, highly effective neutron-absorbing isotope, xenon-135. The reactor design hadn't accounted for this previously unknown poison. The solution. Fortunately, the designers had incorporated a few extra channels for future expansion. Engineers worked furiously to reload the B reactor with more fuel slugs into these peripheral channels, creating enough neutron flux to burn through the xenon-135 and sustain the reaction. This last-minute fix saved the plutonium production schedule. The chemical nightmare. Once irradiated, the fuel slugs were intensely radioactive. They were sent via rail to the T-plant for plutonium separation, a horrifyingly dangerous chemical process.
the canyon. Separation was done in massive, heavily shielded buildings called canyons. Workers, many of them segregated laborers, operated cranes and mixers remotely from behind 7 feet of concrete, peering through periscopes because any direct exposure would be lethal. The waste. The process generated colossal amounts of lethal radioactive waste, which was pumped into massive underground tanks near the Columbia River. The long-term environmental disaster this created was yet another unforeseen consequence of the necessary secrecy and speed. The laborers responsible for construction and initial cleanup were once again those at the bottom of the project's social ladder. Part 5. The Social Structure of Secrecy. Chapter 14. Life in a Gated Community, Los Alamos. Site Y, Los Alamos, was unlike Oak Ridge or Hanford. It was not an industrial site, but a scientific commune, a crucible of intellectual elite, deliberately isolated on a remote mesa in New Mexico. The baby boom on the hill. Oppenheimer and Groves decreed that the scientists and their families should live on-site to minimize travel and security risks. This created a strange, intense social environment. The class divide was sharply drawn. The top scientists and their families lived in renovated houses from the former Los Alamos Ranch School. Technicians, secretaries, and the crucial women calculators lived in cramped prefabricated dormitories or hutments. The Hispanic and Native American workers who maintained the site were often housed outside the secured area. Security and surveillance. Everything was monitored. Incoming and outgoing mail was censored. Phone calls were prohibited or monitored. The children's bedtime stories often involved coded talk about Uncle Robert's big experiment. The pressure cooker environment led to intense relationships, intellectual rivalries, and profound stress. The wives' contribution. Many brilliant women, like Lily Hornig, a chemist, were initially hired only for clerical work because of their gender. Hornig eventually successfully lobbied to work in chemistry, contributing to the analysis of the bomb's initiator. The constant demand for highly skilled labor slowly eroded some gender barriers, although the status of wives was primarily tied to their husbands' positions. Chapter 15. Jim Crow at the Atomic Gate, Oak Ridge. The construction of Oak Ridge was an unprecedented meeting of cutting-edge technology and entrenched Southern racism. General Groves, concerned only with speed and security, chose to fully comply with Jim Crow laws, creating a segregated city within the most secret facility in the nation. The two cities. Oak Ridge was essentially two cities, built side by side, but with a massive gulf in resources and quality of life. Happy Valley and the Hutments. Black workers, numbering over 10,000, were relegated to Happy Valley, an isolated camp of temporary barracks and poorly built, cramped hutments. These areas lacked basic amenities like paved roads, sewage connections, and adequate lighting. Black workers were given separate inferior buses to take them to work, separate smaller cafeterias, and separate inadequate medical facilities. They were excluded from the main guest house and the white-only recreational areas, which featured swimming pools, theaters, and sports fields. The job ceiling. Crucially, African American workers faced a rigid job ceiling. They were primarily confined to heavy construction, maintenance, laundry, and janitorial services. Even black men with advanced degrees were often relegated to common labor jobs. The quiet resistance. Despite the crushing discrimination, records show evidence of quiet resistance. The waitress strike. In one instance, African American waitresses at a segregated Oak Ridge mess hall staged a brief strike to protest unequal pay and poor working conditions, a rare act of open dissent within the heavily policed perimeter. The irony of loyalty. Many black workers, despite the humiliation, viewed their work as a vital contribution to the war effort against fascism. Their loyalty to the nation was absolute, even as the nation denied them basic equality in return. They risked their lives building the plants that would save democracy abroad while fighting for basic dignity at home. Chapter 16. The Silent Eviction. Hanford. The location of Hanford along the Columbia River required the massive, abrupt seizure of hundreds of square miles of land. This act of eminent domain forcibly displaced both Anglo-American settlers and, most significantly, the Native American tribes whose history on the land predated the United States itself. Displacing the ancestors. The Wanapum, Yakima, and Nez Perce tribes held spiritual and subsistence ties to the Columbia River, particularly to the Priest Raps and the surrounding arid plains. Their ancestral fishing grounds and burial sites were located squarely within the condemned zone. The Army's rationale was one of wartime expediency. The needs of the nation, or rather the needs of the Manhattan Project, trumped all private and ancestral rights. The emotional and cultural cost was immeasurable. Tribes were forced to move away from the river that provided their identity and food sources. The subsequent operation of the reactors further poisoned the river and the salmon runs, irreversibly damaging their cultural and ecological systems. The environmental racism inherent in the site selection and operation created a legacy of injustice that continues to this day. Part 6. Crisis and Consequences, 1945 and beyond. Chapter 17. The Plutonium Crisis and the Implosion Lens. In early 1945, the Los Alamos scientists faced the ultimate crisis. The plutonium bred in the Hanford reactors was contaminated with trace amounts of the isotope Pu-240. This contamination caused the plutonium to spontaneously release neutrons too quickly. If a Pu-239 core was assembled too slowly, it would initiate a premature, weak explosion, a fizzle, before the full chain reaction could be established. The only solution was an utterly complex, untested design, implosion. The challenge? The Pu-239 core had to be compressed to twice its normal density in a matter of microseconds. This required surrounding the core with a perfectly symmetrical shell of high explosives known as the implosion lens. Kistioski's mission. Chemist George Kistioski was put in charge of the explosives division. He had to invent explosive lenses, shaped charges composed of alternating layers of fast-burning and slow-burning conventional explosives that would focus the shock wave inward onto the core with spherical perfection. The calculating women's triumph. The exact shape, timing, and velocity of the implosion wave could only be determined through agonizingly complex hydrodynamic calculations. It was the women of the Caltech group, the unheralded human computers, who performed the necessary differential equation-based calculations. Their perfectionist, round-the-clock work proved the feasibility of the implosion lens, directly enabling the successful Fat Man design. Their silent, essential contribution saved the plutonium path to the bomb. Chapter 18. Trinity, the day the world changed. On July 16, 1945, at 5:29:45 a.m., the gadget, the prototype implosion device, was detonated at the Trinity site in the Jornada del Muerto. The spectacle and the secrecy. The flash. The resulting explosion vaporized the steel tower, melted the sand into radioactive green glass, trinitite, and produced a column of fire and smoke visible for hundreds of miles. The immense power was terrifying and awe-inspiring. Groves' cover-up. To conceal the nature of the explosion, General Groves released a swift cover story to the press. A remote New Mexico Army depot containing a large quantity of high explosives and pyrotechnics had accidentally blown up. The scientists' agony. The success brought immense relief, mixed with profound dread.
J.R. Robert Oppenheimer famously recalled the Sanskrit passage, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The scientists knew that the terrifying power they had harnessed was now in the hands of global politics. The final decision and the unresolved debate. With the successful test, the decision to use the bomb was formalized largely by President Harry S. Truman, who was at the Potsdam Conference when he received the coded message, "Baby successfully born." The Szilard Petition. Hungarian physicist Leo Szilard, an early proponent of the bomb, circulated a petition urging President Truman to not use the weapon without first demonstrating its power to the Japanese, or at least giving a clear warning. This petition, signed by dozens of scientists, was intercepted and effectively suppressed by General Groves, who ensured it never reached the president. The ethical debate remained unresolved and hidden from the public. Chapter 19. An Unfinished Reckoning. In the immediate aftermath of the war, the Manhattan Project personnel melted back into civilian life, but the project's secrets and its injustices lingered. The Red Scare and the espionage revelation. Klaus Fuchs. In 1950, physicist Klaus Fuchs was arrested in Britain, confessing to have passed virtually every detail of the implosion bomb design to the Soviet Union. His betrayal, combined with that of the American spies Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, ignited the Cold War's nuclear arms race and fueled the anti-communist frenzy of the McCarthy era. Oppenheimer's humiliation. In 1954, J.R. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, was stripped of his security clearance during a televised, humiliating loyalty hearing, largely due to his left-wing associations and his later opposition to the development of the hydrogen bomb. The machinery of secrecy and surveillance eventually consumed even its greatest architect. The health legacy and the forgotten workers. Decades of secrecy ensured that the long-term health consequences for the non-scientific workforce, the miners who dug the uranium, the laborers who worked near the chemical separation plants, and the workers exposed to dust and toxins, were largely ignored. The downwinders and the site workers. It took massive political pressure and decades of lobbying before the U.S. government established the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, RECA, which began to acknowledge and compensate the downwinders, civilians exposed to radiation from above-ground tests, and the atomic veterans and workers at the weapons complex who had developed cancers and other diseases due to their wartime service. The echoes in the new age. The Manhattan Project, an enterprise born of fear and necessity, did not just create a weapon, it created the modern world, the Cold War, the nuclear power industry, and the concept of big science, massive government-funded research endeavors, a legacy of irony. The story of the Manhattan Project's hidden hands, the women calculators, the segregated black laborers, and the displaced Native Americans is a profound study in American irony. The most technologically advanced effort of its time was built upon the most archaic social structures. The project that saved democracy abroad enforced systemic discrimination at home. The recognition. Today, the names of the Caltech women, the struggles of the Oak Ridge workers, and the injustice done to the Native American tribes are slowly being integrated into the historical narrative. Their belated recognition reveals a deeper truth. The bomb was not just built by genius, but by the relentless, often painful, and largely uncredited toil of tens of thousands of ordinary people who served their country from the shadows.